Hello and welcome to the Rainy Diaries channel, where we share creepy and terrifying stories accompanied by the relaxing sound of rain, perfect for a good night's sleep. We guarantee that all stories are written by humans, not AI, and all the volumes I upload are unique with no repeated stories. We hope you have a pleasant night's sleep. Here is the first story. A Face in the Dark. I had only moved into the apartment complex a few weeks ago, eager to start my new job in the city. The excitement of independence, new friends, and unfamiliar places was invigorating. But as the days wore on, loneliness began to creep in, especially when the city outside went quiet at night. One evening, I sat by my window, absent-mindedly gazing at the street below. Suddenly, something caught my attention. In the apartment directly across from mine, a tall silhouette stood motionless by the window. The room behind him was dark, devouring any details, but I could tell it was a man. He didn't move. A strange compulsion tugged at me, and I raised my hand in an awkward wave. He didn't respond, just stood there, staring back. A cold shiver ran down my spine, unsettling me. With a sense of growing discomfort, I pulled the window shut and turned away. The next night, I looked across the way, and there he was again. Still, watching. Night after night, the same figure stood there, unmoving. This wasn't a trick of the light or a fleeting shadow. Someone was there, unwavering, facing my window. Dread began to settle in my chest, suffocating me. I approached my real estate agent who had arranged my rental. He waved off my concerns with a casual chuckle. "That apartment," he said, "it belongs to the Stevens, just a father and his teenage daughter. The guy's nice. Maybe he smokes by the window." But that didn't explain the stillness, the unblinking stare. Something about it felt wrong. Off. I could no longer bear the growing unease gnawing at me, so I decided to confront it head on. I knocked on the door of the apartment one evening. A man in his mid-40s answered, a loud music blaring from one of the rooms behind him. I introduced myself and hesitantly mentioned the figure I'd seen by the window. He blinked, then let out a short, nervous laugh. "Oh, wait here." He disappeared inside for a moment, returning a moment later, dragging a life-size cardboard cutout of a famous TV star. "My daughter's obsessed with him," he explained with a shrug. "Got it for her birthday. If it's bothering you, I'll put up some curtains." I forced a laugh, muttered something about it being fine, and left. But the interaction didn't sit right with me. Something about the way he avoided my gaze, the way he never invited me inside, felt off. I closed my curtains that evening and avoided the window from then on. But even so, the lingering sense of unease never left. And then one night, as I was scrolling through my phone, a breaking news alert sent a chill through my body. A serial killer long on the run had been spotted near a subway station. His last known victim, a 15-year-old girl, had gone missing months ago. She had been his student, just like two others before her. Their bodies were found in the woods, but until now, no one had connected the dots. The article included a photo. My heart stopped. It was Mr. Stevens. I stared at the photo, my hands trembling as I dialed the police. The hours blurred after that. The police told me to stay put. At midnight, a detective knocked at my door. My real estate agent stood next to him, looking pale, as though he had seen a ghost. I told him everything, the cardboard cutout, my encounter with Stevens, and my growing suspicions. The detective listened in silence, his face unreadable. He exhaled sharply and nodded slowly. "We found something in the apartment," he said, his voice low. "I think you need to see it." A police officer stepped forward, holding the same cardboard cutout Stevens had shown me. But now, something was different. Bold, red letters had been scrawled across the figure's chest. "Help me." My stomach lurched. It hit me. The girl had known someone might see the cutout, that someone might notice the eerie stillness of the figure. It was her last, desperate plea for help, placed there by the window, hoping someone would notice. I had noticed, and I had shut my curtains. Beneath the message, in a mocking, more deliberate scrawl, was another line. "If only you had looked closer. I haven't opened my curtains since that night." The police cleared out the apartment days later. There were no family members, no friends, no visitors. Just silence. No one ever rented it again. But sometimes in the dead of night, when the city is hushed and my room is engulfed in darkness, I swear I can see a shadow standing across the street, watching, waiting. A reminder of my regret, one that will never fade. Story deep. I've spent more time alone with my thoughts than most people, but ever since the accident, I don't feel alone in my head anymore. I used to be a deep water welder. My usual assignments were between 500 and 800 feet below the surface of the ocean. Darkness and the deep never bothered me. That changed the last time I was on the ship. It was a routine job. We were pressurizing in the bell before our dive. There were 5 of us, all attached to the diving bell by an umbilical, our lifeline. It pumped warm water into our suits, supplied electricity for our headlamps, fed oxygen into our helmets, and powered our welding equipment. We'd been on the job for 2 weeks at this point. I was in the middle of cleaning a section of pipe when a voice crackled through my headset. Urgent. Get back to the bell. Now. Then the ground disappeared beneath me. Nothing but deep, dark blue. Something yanked me. Hard. I wasn't swimming. I wasn't falling. I was being dragged. Water rushed past me like a silent scream, pressure tightening around my skull. My stomach lurched. My head spun. And then, bam! I hit something solid. One of the subsea structures. Pain exploded through my shoulder. My arm, something had my arm. The pressure built impossibly fast. It felt like teeth, like a vice, like something was biting down with slow, deliberate force. Then a pop. A hot, wet explosion of red filled the water. Silence. My headlamp flickered, then died. Utter, perfect darkness swallowed me whole. I was floating, my body numb, my mind scrambling to understand. My right arm was gone. Just gone. Then thud. I hit the seafloor. My helmet clanked against my skull. Everything was wrong. I didn't know if I was alive or dead. The silence was overwhelming. Not just quiet. Absence. No bubbles, no distant creaks of the ship above, no hum of my suit systems. It was like the ocean had stopped existing. And the cold, God, the cold. It wasn't just seeping into my bones. It was pulling at me like fingers pressing into my skin, searching for a way in. I had maybe 5 minutes, maybe less. I reached for my umbilical cord, fingers numb, movements sluggish. I had to tie myself off. If I floated away, they'd never find me. That's when I felt it. Something brushed against me. Not the current. Not debris. Something else. My body locked up. It was behind me. Close. Watching. The pressure in my ears changed, like something enormous had entered the water. The darkness wasn't empty anymore. It was full. Then, a voice. Let's make a deal. The words weren't spoken. They were inside my skull, crawling like insects through my thoughts. I couldn't breathe. There was no oxygen left. My vision tunneled. My heartbeat was slowing. I was already dead. So I said, okay, and then nothing. I woke up in the diving bell, gasping. The others were around me, shouting. Someone grabbed my shoulders. My suit was soaked in seawater, my helmet askew, the oxygen mask pressed against my face, forcing air into my lungs. My arm, my right arm, it was there. No scar, no sign that it had ever been missing, but it felt wrong, like it didn't belong to me, like something was inside it. I caught my reflection in my helmet's visor. For just a second, my lips moved, but I didn't make a sound. Story. Empty zoo. My big brother had been missing for a year. It all started when he went out of town for a job interview. He kept in touch through our family chat room on his way there, right up until he sat in the company's waiting room. They're calling my name. Wish me luck. That was his last message. Nothing has been heard from him since. We called his number. It rang, but no one answered. We checked his social media, but there were no updates for a year. My brother, Eric, vanished into thin air. A job interview out of town didn't sound alarming. None of us, Mom, Dad, or I, bothered to ask which town or company he was heading to. We'll ask when he gets the job, we thought. It took me a year to gather the courage to go through his belongings. That's when I finally pieced together his destination, Callisto. A small town 2 hours west of our parents' house. Callisto was tiny compared to our city. After a year, the odds of finding a trace of him were slim, but I just couldn't let it go. I had to try. So, I went to Callisto. The town was quaint, with barely a skyscraper in sight. As I drove around, I tried to imagine what company a civil engineering graduate like my brother might have been interviewing with. There were a few likely places, but it wasn't as if I could just walk in and ask if they remembered him. It had been a year. While driving aimlessly, I passed a zoo. It was surprisingly large for a town of this size. Then I noticed the name engraved on its curved gate. Empty Zoo. Weird, I thought. Who names a zoo empty? Something clicked in my memory. I remembered I saw something when I looked through all Eric's work stuff. I pulled out a folder where my brother kept all his documents related to the companies he'd had interviews with. There was a piece of paper, the size of a business card. One word was written in large, all capital letters on one side. Empty. I flipped the paper to check the other side. Blank. Empty. Weird. Did Eric have an interview at a zoo called Empty? Curiosity got the better of me, and I parked the car. The ticketing booth was deserted, and the gate was unlocked. I wasn't trying to trespass, but something about this place called to me. The zoo was eerie. Every cage I saw housed only one kind of animal, monkeys. Dozens of them, but no other species. What kind of zoo has only monkeys? I muttered under my breath. The monkeys noticed me and became agitated. They reached out, waving their hands inward as if pleading for help. Weird and creepy. Then I passed one cage, and a particular monkey caught my attention. Unlike the others, this one monkey appeared to be more hysterical than the rest. It reached its hand out of the cage, but I noticed something odd. Instead of waving in like the others, this one monkey's hand was waving out, as if urging me to leave. That's when I saw it. It felt completely inappropriate, but for some reason I felt like there was a similarity between that monkey and my lost brother, Eric. I took a closer look. The monkey had something that looked like a birthmark on its left cheek. Brown, butterfly-shaped. It was huge, almost covering its entire left cheek. Weirdly enough, my brother had exactly the same birthmark. Brown, butterfly-shaped, covering his left cheek. I froze. The monkey grew more frantic. Its hand kept waving outward, even more vigorously than before. I backed away, my heart pounding. The creepy and eerie feeling was strong, so I immediately turned around and bolted out of the zoo. It was already dark, so I had to find a hotel to stay for the night. That night, I wrote about my experience on my personal blog. Within an hour, when I checked it back, there were 56 comments. Never in my life had I gotten 56 comments on my blog in an hour. Every single comment shared the same story. They had their family, wives, husbands, friends, colleagues, whatever, leave town to attend a job interview and then went missing. 32 of them were trying to look for their missing relatives, visiting the said town, all in 32 different towns, and happened to encounter a zoo with the same name. Empty. A zoo with the same weird name displaying only monkeys. And there are monkeys that, for some reason, somehow appeared to resemble their missing relatives. This is truly horrifying. I couldn't get ahead of it, so I was thinking of returning to the zoo just a few hours later to investigate further. I had a strong urge to find my missing brother. So I walked out of my hotel room, and in the dead of night, I drove back to the zoo. It was located not too far from the hotel where I stayed, just a few blocks away. In the distance, I could see a long, high wall with a glimpse of a curved gate. It was dark, so I couldn't see clearly. But I was sure it was the gate with the words "Empty Zoo" engraved on it. I kept driving until I passed the gate and peeked inside to see if anyone was guarding it. It was a zoo. There should be a security guard or something. If he didn't let me pass, I should at least ask him something about the zoo. I looked through the gate into the area where the zoo should be. It was empty. No zoo. Nothing. I shifted my gaze to the curved gate where "Empty Zoo" should have been. Blank. No text. Nothing. What the hell? I parked my car abruptly and got out. As I got closer to the gate, I saw someone standing right behind it. He appeared to be smoking. "Excuse me, sir." I called out to him. "Yeah, what can I help you with?" he responded. He looked like a security guard. "The zoo. Where's the zoo?" I asked. His brows furrowed. "What zoo?" "A zoo. I was here this afternoon. Just a few hours ago, no one was guarding the ticketing booth, and the gate was open. So I took a walk inside. There were only monkeys in it, no other animals," I explained. The security guard looked stunned. "Sir, there was no zoo here. Never was," he said. I was about to complain, but something came to mind. Maybe I took a wrong turn. "Oh, my bad. Where's the zoo then?" "Maybe I took a wrong turn," I said. "No zoo, sir. This town just celebrated its 42nd birthday last week, and we've never had a zoo in 42 years. "No way," I shouted in shock. "But I was here just a few hours ago." "What time was it, if I may ask?" 4 p.m. "Sir, I work a double shift today. I've been here since 2 p.m. I didn't see anyone entering, and not you. Not anyone." The security guard looked concerned. "I'm not sure if I should tell you this, sir," he said slowly and carefully, "but you're not the first one to ask about a zoo. No, no, sir. I've been working here for 4 years. We've never had a zoo here. But over those 4 years, countless people have come here asking me about a zoo. When they ask about it, it's always their second time coming. The first time was hours earlier, and they trespassed the gate because no one was guarding it. They claimed there was a zoo here with only monkeys in it. Just like me, I said. Yes, sir. Just like you. I froze. My blood ran cold. I don't know what happened here, sir. It's strange and creepy for me, too, having experienced countless people coming asking for exactly the same thing that was never here. The security guard paused for a while, seeming uncertain. This place belonged to a billionaire entrepreneur. He tried selling or renting this place for years. I was a security guard, and he didn't talk business with me, so I heard this weird thing from someone else. Heard what? That he actually rented this place to a zoo. And it has been 8 years now. But I repeat, never saw any zoo here. I shivered. Then something suddenly popped into my head. Does he own another location this huge in another town? I asked. I mean, he's a billionaire entrepreneur. The security guard seemed to hesitate. As far as I'm concerned, sir, yes, he owns other locations just as huge in other towns. I don't know how many of them, really. But we guards talk to each other. He paused, seeming somehow terrified. Guess what he rented those locations to? A zoo? I took a guess. Yes, sir, he replied. A zoo. All of them. He rented the locations to a zoo, the same zoo company, on paper. What do you mean on paper? I frowned. The guard glanced around nervously before leaning in. On paper, they were all rented to a zoo. In reality, the security guard turned his head around to look toward the empty lot inside the gate. They were all just like this. Empty. Story, huge storm. The thunder outside my third-hour class was soothing. It was close to spring break, so we were just watching a Disney or Pixar movie. I can't remember which company made it, but it was Wall-E. Nobody was paying attention, either sleeping or on their phones. Hell, even the teacher was on his phone. The rain began coming down harder. I was seated by the window, and all I was doing was watching the rain. April storms like this were common where I lived, so it was nothing out of the ordinary. The bell rang to let us out of third hour and go to lunch. In my school, you could go outside during lunch and you didn't have to eat. It could be cool when you just weren't hungry. Of course, like usual, there were some of those kids, you know the ones, who thought it would be funny to go outside and get soaked. I checked my phone while eating, so I didn't notice that they hadn't come back all lunch period. I got a weather alert on my phone that we were under a tornado watch. Looking outside, it seemed about right. When the bell rang, I tossed my tray and headed to PE. The kids who had gone outside were supposed to be in that class. However, when the teacher did roll call, all 3 of them were absent. A couple of us were confused because we had just seen them. One kid spoke up to say that she'd seen them go outside during lunch. The teacher sighed and pressed a button to talk to the office. Hello? The voice rang out over the speaker. Yeah, are Ethan, Luke, and Nate inside? My students said they were here just a couple of minutes ago. There was silence over the intercom. We all stood around awkwardly, wondering when we were going to play Capture the Flag. The voice came back over the intercom after a couple of seconds. And you said they're not with you? No, they're not here. We heard the intercom hang up after that. The teacher assumed that the kids were running around in the halls and that the office staff had to try and find them. We started Capture the Flag, and it usually only took 2 rounds of the game before the bell rang and we had to go. However, the bell didn't ring. We ended up playing a 3rd round before we realized something was wrong. Our attention snapped to the clock, which showed 13 minutes after the class was supposed to end. Just as we were preparing to leave, the intercom rang out. Attention teachers, keep your students in your class until further notice. My stomach sank. I was always a nervous kid, and this made me nervous like many other things do. The teacher looked confused for a second before switching the game to Martian Tag. We played for a while before getting tired. He conceded and put on a movie for us to watch. Space Jam. A couple of minutes in, we heard a blood-freezing shriek from outside the classroom. The teacher naturally got up to investigate, and all of us were staring at the door in fear, wondering what could have made that noise. A kid I didn't know too well, Kai, snuck over to the door to look out of the small windows. He stared for a couple of seconds before pushing the door open and leaving. I had no idea what to do, but after 3 other students did the same, I freaked out. Everyone in the room was starting to wonder what was happening. So we made our way to the door. All 14 of us left, and we peeked out the window. It was just the empty hallway. It was still raining outside, and it was getting unnaturally loud. "Well, I'm going home," a kid said before pushing us out of the way and leaving the gym. I wanted to get out of there at that point, too. Slowly, everyone filed out of the gym and went off in different directions. All I had on me was my phone, but that was the only important thing I brought to school. I decided to just head straight for the exit, as did one other person, Max. He was annoying, but in a way that makes everyone happier. It's hard to explain. We didn't talk much as we rushed for the front exit. When we did make it, the office next to it was abandoned. Nobody was in sight, and the lights were off. We looked outside into the rain, and we weren't able to see anything at all. It was raining way too hard. I decided to wait until the rain slowed down before I left. However, Max did not share this same line of thought. He opened the door and walked into the rain. I checked my phone, and like you'd expect, there was no service. I put it back into my pocket because I didn't have the password to the school Wi-Fi. I didn't have any idea what to do while waiting for the rain to stop, so I wandered the hall. When I got into the area that had the 6th grade classes, I saw someone dart into a room, faster than I could believe. You know how your vision clouds when you see something extremely startling. I hesitated in the hall, wondering if it was just a scared kid or what. I slowly made my way over to the door that it went into. Like many classroom doors, it had the tall and narrow window with wires in it. I peeked into the window and saw a student crouched in a corner, sobbing. I slowly opened the door, and he immediately looked to the door. The fear on his face is still burned into my memory. He ran over to me and hugged me. Based on his size, I'd assume he was in 6th grade. After less than a second, he let go of me, realizing what he had done. "I'm sorry, it's just that I don't know where anybody else is, and there's something scary in the halls," he said through tears, sniffling every couple of seconds. I felt sorrow while looking at him, and I decided that I'd make sure he gets out alive as well. "Listen to me. We're gonna get out of this, all right? I'll protect you until the storm is over." He calmed down a bit and nodded. I looked around outside of the classroom, wondering what he meant by something scary. I thought maybe it was what made that horrible shriek earlier. I let him out of the classroom, and I wandered the halls once again. The silence was deafening. I started to panic, wondering what happened to the rest of the students. As I rounded a corner, I saw what I'm sure the kid was referring to when he mentioned something scary. I quickly ducked back, holding my breath. The kid, who had told me his name was Junior, was hiding behind me. I heard the footsteps of whatever it was that was in the hall. It was opening doors and looking inside. I was in the 7th grade hall at the moment. As it opened a door, I heard someone scream, and then that hideous shriek that the monster made. I had ducked behind the corner too fast to have gotten a good look at it. The scream coming from the poor person in that room was quickly silenced, after which the scream was replaced with the sound of meaty crunching. The hallway I was in had a window to the outside. The rain had definitely slowed down, but I wasn't going to risk what was in the rain. I went back the other way. I forgot to mention, but at this point, the power in the school was off, and the light inside was dim in well-windowed areas. If there weren't windows, then it was pitch black. I rounded another corner and found myself staring down a black hallway. Under any other circumstances, I would have avoided it, but I heard the monster a ways back, and it was getting closer. I slowly made my way down the hallway, grabbing the hand of Junior so as not to lose where he was. I managed to find an unlocked door and made my way in to try and hide from the monster. When I entered, I felt a book slam into my head. "Ow! What the hell?" I couldn't see anything in the room, and when I responded, I heard someone gasp in the darkness. They profusely apologized. I had a headache from it. I reached over to the doorknob to try and find a way to lock it. Luckily, there was a small lock that prevented the doorknob from being turned. I was sure that the monster heard me yell. My suspicions were confirmed when it slammed against the door, eliciting a scream from Junior. The monster tried the doorknob, but when it didn't open, it started to get violent. It was trying to break down the door. At this point, I accepted my inevitable death. Then an idea popped into my head. Some of the classrooms have a closet that leads into another classroom. I didn't want to turn on my flashlight so that the monster didn't know where we were going. I asked the kid if there was a closet in this room, to which I got no reply. There must be, I thought, because I realized that the kid was no longer in here. I stumbled around in the darkness, shaking from fear. I had to keep going, though, for Junior at the very least. I managed to find the closet, and I slipped in. I made my way to the next classroom, as the door from the previous one was destroyed. I heard it shatter. I realized my mistake, and I rushed over to the window in this classroom. I had no choice but to brave what was out in the rain. I tossed a book at the window, hoping to break it, but it hopelessly bounced off. I made a rash decision and tried my hardest to punch out the window. It cracked. I tossed another punch, pushing through the pane, and the window broke. The glass deeply lacerated my hand. I hopped out, cutting my legs. As I turned around to grab Junior, the monster broke its way into the room. Junior reached out to me, but the monster was faster. I got a good look at it as it dragged Junior away. It was a large mass of flesh, eyes, mouths, and hair. It grabbed Junior and left the room. I went numb. The screams that Junior let out as it took him haunt my dreams to this day. I tried to figure out where I was outside as the rain slowed to a drizzle. I was in the parking lot where it had to be a dozen police cars and ambulances waiting. EMTs ran over to me when they saw me. From that point to the hospital, it was a blur. My parents, police, government agents. I got asked questions from everybody that knew about what happened. In the end, I got no answers. All I knew was that 112 people were missing. I never knew what came of the monster or what happened to the people who disappeared in the rain. I left the town soon after, and now I live in southern Indiana. That was 4 years ago. I recently graduated high school and tried to find out if the event was recorded online in some way or another. I couldn't find anything about it. No obituaries, no nothing. Anytime it rains now, I always get scared. My only hope is that whatever the monster was, it didn't escape. Story. I haven't slept since 2023. Growing up, I had two choices in life. I could follow in my father's footsteps as a farm equipment maintenance worker. It was a decent job with decent pay, but I always got this sense of dread whenever I walked by his workshop. It was this big windowless building in a pale green color, and I always had this feeling that if I stayed there for too long, that place would eat me alive. So, I went with the other choice in life. My mother. She was always larger than life, and she wanted me to be too. She was all about the hustle. When she and my father went separate ways, she took me and my sister across the country to Bangkok. She was the embodiment of Prio Wai Kin Wan, roughly translated to endure the sourness and enjoy the sweetness later. She would take any job at any time and claw her way upward. So my sister and I turned out the same. We would work, study, and socialize. We were supposed to be everything at once: smart, strong, cultural, and opinionated. I studied computer science at night and worked delivery during the day. I got a pretty good eye for traffic, so I can make it around the city without fearing for my life. That's easier said than done. Traffic laws around here seem to be more of a suggestion rather than law. I also did the odd job making websites for friends, family, and acquaintances. That would eat up most of my weekend nights. And finally, the one job that never paid me anything: looking out for my sister. My sister Azara worked as a club and event promoter in the inner city. She mostly worked weekends and nights, and I'm the only one she trusts to watch her back. If someone bothered her, I'd be on call. If she needed a sudden ride home, I'd be on call. I'd get yelled at for being late, or for not responding fast enough, or for 1,000 different reasons. It was, by far, the worst job I'd ever had, but family is family. I would be working so much that the only time my friends would see me was when I came around to pick up Azara. They started to call me Look, or Lurk, something you say when it's time to close for the night. I was the closing time guy. When I showed up, it was time to go home. not the most fun nickname to be stuck with in your early 20s. When my mother passed from pancreatic cancer in 2020, I just turned 21. I was put in a position where I had to support both myself and my sister economically. Sure, she pulled part of her weight too, but she was looking ahead. She wanted to work in cosmetology, especially in movies and TV shows. That would take money and time. So for a while there, I had a lot of sudden weight put on my shoulders. Studies, work, more work, and being there for Azara. I barely slept, and when I did, I'd wake up at the slightest sound. I was so used to sleeping lightly, waiting for my sister to call for a pickup. But I didn't have a lot of choice. I had to keep going, for everyone's sake. So I made a plan. I just had to make it until I was done with my studies. I looked for temporary solutions. I'd take caffeine pills, but they ended up giving me a stomachache. I tried this dextrose drink from a local pharmacy, but that thing almost gave me arrhythmia. I didn't want to try any heavier stuff, so I kind of gave up hope. Then I met a guy named Somyot. Somyot is a nice guy in the wrong kind of business, about 10 years older than me, but 30 years older at heart. To this day, I'm not sure what he really does, apart from co-managing a couple of downtown clubs. I think he buys things from places you shouldn't, some kind of gray area importer. He was a part owner of a club where Izara worked on the weekend. The first time I met him, he was sitting outside the club with a cold beer, having a cigarette. He didn't look like the owner, so I sat down next to him to tie my shoes. He looked me up and down. "You just gonna sit down like that?" he asked. "You got an appointment?" "I need an appointment for a chair." "For my chair, yeah." "You the boss?" "I'm a boss, yeah." I was too tired to care, and frankly, getting my sister fired from that place would have made my life easier. So I looked right back at him. "You don't look like a boss to me." I didn't know if he was going to hit me or hire me, but he ended up belly laughing and offering me a cigarette, so I guess I made the right choice. I would spend about 1 or 2 nights a week at Somyot's club. He'd offer me a job, but the pay was awful and I was busy with other things. I literally didn't have enough hours of the day to work for him. I think that was for the best, though. He was a great guy to hang out with, but he must have been an awful boss. Cheap bastard. Somyot had some sympathy for me, though. I was working hard to make ends meet, and he respected the hustle. He offered me a couple of side gigs, for example, picking up leftover credit cards at ATMs. There's a kind of ATM that takes a long time for the card to come back out, so a lot of tourists think it ate them, so they leave the card behind. Somyot paid a little for each card I could bring him, so I would walk around and pick them up while waiting for Azara to finish work. Every little bit helps. We developed a good friendship. I would show up an hour or so before Azara needed a pickup just to hang out with Somyot. We'd usually just talk about movies, cars, girls, whatever came to mind. I didn't have a lot of people in my life I could just talk to about nothing, and I don't think he did either. We'd usually end up having a beer and chewing betel nuts. They're these nuts that you wrap in a leaf and chew. It gives you a pick-me-up that makes your mouth burn. It sums up Somyot pretty well. Legal, but spicy. But things took a turn when I was invited to a private party of his. See, I'd been up for 27 hours straight at that point. I'd been working on a large project for my computer science class, and I'd been trying to get a couple of extra hours in at the delivery company. That and a client needed me to redo their homepage after it got hacked. It was a perfect storm of a lot of little things, all at once, and it drove me to exhaustion. But I still got to Somyot's party. He had a nice place outside of town. He'd invited some people from the club and some business associates. He had these parties about once every 6 months or so. It was a way to show appreciation and brag a little. Still, Somyot had pulled out all the stops. He'd felt sorry for me, seeing me work so hard, and he'd brought a guy there from a research institute. They needed people for a data entry job, and he thought it'd be my kind of thing. The problem is, I was so tired, I looked like I was on drugs. I didn't even understand the guy was offering me a paid position. As the party died down, Somyot took me aside and sat me down for a chat. We chewed some betel nuts, and he took off his sunglasses. The man didn't look me in the eyes a lot, so I knew something was up. "I worry about you," he said. "You're working too hard." "I'm sorry," I said. It's not that I don't appreciate this, but I had so much to do. Then tell me, he continued. Tell me how I can help. You don't need to do anything, I said. I'm just glad to have a friend, you know? I could see the wheels turning in his head. His eyes welled up a little. He gave me a hug and took me out to the veranda overlooking the city. He patted me on the back. You deserve better, he said. I'll get you something better. The following weekend, I got a text from Somyot. He was excited to show me something. He usually had something to share, but this time seemed different. I was a bit anxious about seeing him, but it was a nice change of pace. So, that Saturday, I was invited into the club. I went straight past the bouncer, through the dance floor, and into the back rooms. From there, I followed a corridor to a small office at the back of the building. After all I'd seen from Somyot, I expected something grander, but it was just a little office with an old laptop, a USB fan, a couple of chairs, and a crappy TV in the corner, all accentuated by a couple of early 2000s posters of women in bikinis posing with cars. Somyot was smiling ear to ear and waved me over. He opened a safe under his desk and pulled out a small box of white pill bottles. They were all sealed and unmarked, except for a small blue sunflower print on the cap. He sat me down and took a bottle out of his pocket to show me. This is gonna help, he said. Trust me. I don't do drugs, boss. I know you don't. This isn't that. He showed me his phone and a conversation he'd had with the guy from the party, the one from the research institute. Apparently, he'd managed to get his hands on a couple of cases of an off-market stimulant. I tried it myself, he said. Going on 2 weeks now, it's a little miracle. What does it do? What's the catch? No need to sleep anymore, he smiled. One pill, you're good for at least 18 hours. No way. You might need another hour or two to recover when you finally go to bed, but apart from that, it's perfect. Doesn't make your piss smell, doesn't mess up your hair, nothing. No way, I repeated. Too good to be true. Somyot sat down at his desk across from me, giving me a long look. You won't let me get you a better job, he said. Let me get you this as a friend. I could tell he was being genuine. You could say a lot about Somyot, but he'd always been honest with me. I swallowed my fears and picked up one of the pills. I don't know, I said. There's got to be a catch. Never more than one a day, he said, or you'll get sick. And no more than 2 days at a time. Maybe 3, but then you'll probably get a headache. Oh, and no drugs. What do you mean? There's a list of things drugs react with, but you don't do that stuff, yeah, so you're good. What about caffeine? As long as you don't pour stuff like... Somyot picked up a small piece of paper and looked it over, reading from a list. Arecoline, cocaine hydrochloride, diacetyl morphine, or methamphetamine, you're good. There goes my Friday night. Funny, Somyot scoffed. If you don't want it, it's fine, but no, I'll try one, and so I did. Taking that first pill was like breathing in after a deep dive. I felt lighter, but not high. I was just well rested, ready to take on the day. But there was also a slight chill to it, like a cold breath sweeping across my nerves. I looked at Somyot like I was seeing him for the first time. He got up and slapped his hands together with a grin. I knew it, he said. I knew this'd be it. How much? I asked. For a bottle. How much? Take it, he smiled, pushing over the whole case. Guy owed me a favor. Really? You're just giving it away? I'm just glad to have a friend. That night was the first time I stuck around to party with Somyot for real. The man was a force of nature. He downed shots like they were water. He knew all the best food vendors on the block by name, and he'd ping-pong from after party to after party without breaking a sweat. I was just along for the ride. We ended up drunk on a bench, watching the sun rise. Not a blink of tiredness in our eyes. Our day was just getting started. No need for biddle nuts to keep us going. I wouldn't need those ever again. Next, you're getting a woman, he murmured. Then a job. A great job. You can fix anything, huh? That's why I'm the boss. I don't want to owe you anything, I said. You get that, right? You don't owe me anything. Kind of feels like I do. He asked me to show him my phone. I did, and he scrolled down to his number on the contact list. He tapped it, hovering his finger over the delete button. You can delete me today and never call me again, and that's up to you. Really? Really. He handed me the phone back and turned his attention to the sun. But for as long as you feel like it, I'm here. He continued. No strings. No strings? He shrugged and slid his final beer my way. It's just nice to be the good guy for once. The next night, lying in my bed, I was scared. I had no idea how my body would respond. It was a make or break moment where I'd find out if Somyot had screwed me over or if he'd really helped me out. I had a whole case of those pills stashed away in the closet, more than enough to keep me going for months. But I took his advice. Every 2 or 3 days or so, I'd give it a rest. So when I went to sleep that night, I didn't know what to expect. I had strange dreams. I dreamt I woke up in this barren world with a dead tree towering in the distance. There were no stars in the sky. It was desolate, but peaceful in a way. And I dreamt that there was someone there in the dark, someone looking for me. But I woke up long before they found me. I was a bit worked up, but it was just a dream. Those fleeting images rolled out of my mind faster than it took me to make breakfast. From that moment on, I decided to give these things a go. I would rest every 3 days or so, but until then, I was constantly on the go. I could work as many hours as I wanted. I could be up all night, finishing projects left and right. I never missed a call from Izara. I could keep up with demands, and I could do it comfortably, without side effects. Sure, whenever I crashed, I'd dream about that place again. The dead tree, reaching for the moon, the desolate ruins, and somewhere out in the eternal night, something was looking for me. But it never had the time to find me. I'd always wake up long before it did. It was comfortable, efficient, and I could do it all. I had some time to work with Somyot, though it wasn't anything major, just odd jobs here and there. He was fair, but didn't pay much. Then again, I was making more money than I could spend. I had another shot at an interview with Somyot's contact at the Research Institute, and this time, I nailed it. It was a basic data entry job, but I could do it remotely, and the pay was almost double what I was making with my delivery job. I needed to brush up on my English, but that wasn't a big deal. Isara and I had learned it early in life, thanks to our mother. Isara had saved enough for her cosmetology classes, so I got more time to focus on other things. I invested some time in a startup app with a few guys from my classes, and we made good progress. Overall, things were looking up. Weeks passed and months turned into a year. I still had plenty of pills left, and I'd fallen into a healthy routine. I slept better, ate better, and had so much more time. I couldn't imagine life without those pills anymore. Still, I couldn't shake the curiosity about that in-between place, the one between wakefulness and dreams. That eerie, starless night with the dead tree far off, the dark shapes wandering the fields of black sand. And who was out there, watching me? I didn't dwell on it too much. I wrote it off as a weird side effect, nothing more. It didn't affect my daily life, so why bother? Fast forward to 2023. I was co-owner of a small business now, no more data entry. We had an office and 5 employees. My nickname still stuck, though it was more sarcastic now. I wasn't the guy showing up at the end anymore. I was the first in line. I'd planned my come-downs carefully, making sure no one noticed. I had a reputation for working around the clock, and no one could figure it out. I kept my secret to myself. Didn't want the pills falling into the wrong hands. My sister had a solid job at a big local mall. Not just any mall, but a major one. It paid well, and she was more than able to support herself. She moved in with a guy, and I got a place of my own. Finally, I could step up and treat myself to something nice. I still kept in touch with Somyot. He was the only other person who knew about the pills. He had stopped taking them, though. They were too distracting when it came to staying on schedule. He was seeing a woman named Wan Wan, and he hated seeing her go to bed alone. It was actually kind of sweet. And more pills for me, so it worked out. In February 2023, my sister got married. The timing was terrible since I had a major project to handle. Even with all the extra time I had, it still wasn't enough. So I had to do something Somyot advised against. I kept going for 5 days straight. Just 2 days beyond the usual 3, but still. At first, I didn't notice anything unusual. Everything worked as expected. But when I finally crashed after almost an entire week without sleep, I had the worst nightmare of my life. Not only was I back there in that desolate place, I could feel it. The black sand slipping into my shoes, the howls of pain in the distance. I thought I heard gunfire too. The sparse vegetation that survived there was twisted into a midnight blue, just like the blue sunflower on the bottle's cap. But this time it wasn't just something lurking in the dark, searching for me. No, it was hunting. I have this vivid memory of crawling through the sands of an ancient ruin, hearing something closing in. Despite the sand, it felt wet, viscous. It made a disgusting sound like a group of large men gasping for breath all at once. I could hear it move across the ruins, searching for me, and wherever it touched, something sizzled like burning acid. It tried to speak. I know it did, but it couldn't. It had too many tongues, all trying to speak at once. Eventually, it found me. I couldn't look. I couldn't breathe. I could feel its immense size without even needing to see it as it towered over me. I tried to shrink, to make myself smaller, but it didn't matter. It sighed, as though it had just enjoyed a cold glass of water on a hot summer's day. It was pleased to find me. And as it drew closer, I heard something dripping, sizzling into the sand. The air was thick with the stench of ammonia and something that smelled like mothballs. It touched my arm, and it burned into my skin. The pain was so intense that I woke up. And when I did, there was a burn, a coin-sized black mark, the flesh around it necrotic, tight against my arm, stinging every time I moved my triceps. That place was real. That thing was real. For an entire week after, I felt like I was on the edge of death. I went to a doctor to have my arm checked, but he couldn't make sense of it. It was an acid burn, but it acted like frostbite. In the end, he had to perform a small procedure to remove the necrotic tissue, but it was fine overall. I just had to keep it clean, bandaged, and brace myself for a nasty scar. But that thing, it had been so vivid. Even days later, I could still smell it. I remember one time in the shower, I had to turn off the water. I thought I heard something sizzling in the other room. Wrapped in a towel, I peered through the door, hoping against hope that I was just being paranoid. That time, I was. But what about next time? I swore off the pills. I was in a good place, and I didn't need them anymore. I'd gained everything I wanted. Sure, it'd take some time to get back to a normal schedule, but I couldn't go back there. No wonder we weren't supposed to take more than 2 or 3 pills in a sequence. If I'd been there a second longer, it would have taken my whole arm. Another hour, and I'd be dead. I decided to give it all back to Somyot. By that time, he had expanded his business a bit. But he'd calmed down as a person. He was a changed man. He was engaged to Wan Wan, and he was trying to turn his life around. In fact, we hadn't seen each other for some time. He was a bit surprised when I called about meeting him in his office. I met Somyot in his downtown office late one Friday night. It was a strange feeling. There were people everywhere, but I still felt like I was alone. There was this thought crawling around in the back of my head, whispering to me that if I slowed down and really listened, I could hear that sizzling acid as it burned into the asphalt. So I kept my head down and tried to get into the music. The bass, the beat of the party. But it was all just superficial. I couldn't help but think back on that thing. Every time I heard a cough, a sneeze, someone clearing their throat, I thought that was it. It found me. I could feel the squelch of it in my ear, almost like a heat. But I made my way through the club and joined Somyot in his office. I put the pills on his desk and sat down across from him. "I'm done with them," I said. "They do something to you?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. I'm done." "All right, no worries," Somyot nodded. "You okay?" "Not really." Despite not hanging out for a while, Somyot was his usual self. He put the pills away, sat down next to me, and handed me a beer. He'd installed a mini fridge next to his desk. The damn thing made more noise than his ceiling fan. "I'm not going to ask about it," he said. "You look like shit. I feel like shit." "What happened to your arm?" "Frostbite." Somyot snorted, but saw that I wasn't laughing. He opened his mouth, but closed it again. Whatever had happened to me, he knew better than to laugh. Instead, he leaned over, looking worried. "Fuck the pills," he said. "You're sticking with me now, all right?" "All right." He made his best effort to keep me company that night. We had drinks, met some people, and sang some karaoke. I almost got into an arm wrestling competition with a drunk Dutch guy. It was nice, and for a moment I didn't hear those awful noises. I didn't smell those smells. Later that night, I could feel myself growing tired. Usually I would pop one of the pills, but I settled for a classic instead, Betel nuts. Somyot and I wrapped them up and bit down. It was nice to feel that familiar crunch and burn. It was a return to form, in a way. It was the way things were supposed to be. By the end of the night, We ended up on that same bench, watching the sun. But this time he was exhausted. He was nodding off over and over as he waited for a friend to pick him up. I was, strangely, not tired in the slightest. Maybe you still got some of it in your system, Somyat mumbled. Makes sense, right? Bigger doses take longer. Probably, I nodded. Or maybe it was the nuts. Nah, they don't work like that, they're a kick, not a trip. By the time Somyot's friend came around to pick him up, he could barely keep his eyes open. He lumbered into the passenger seat and looked back at me one final time. I'm getting rid of them, he said. Don't worry. It's done. You'll be fine. But I wasn't feeling fine. Or rather, I was. But that was the problem. I went home, and I still couldn't sleep. I went an entire day, and I still couldn't sleep. I hadn't taken any pills for some time, but I was still up and about. I was getting worried, but I didn't know where to turn. Had I taken a pill by accident? I reached out to Somyot's contact at the Research Institute, but we couldn't talk about it over email since it was monitored, and this was hardly legal, so we decided to meet downtown later in the week. For the next few days, I was a wreck. I kept thinking about that place and that thing. I'd been up for so many days that I didn't want to think about what would happen when I returned. It would be waiting for me. I could feel it, hear it. I met the man from the Research Institute early one morning. I paid for his coffee, but I didn't get any myself. He was an American in his 50s with a shaved head and a well-trimmed goatee. He hid behind a black baseball cap and wasn't much for small talk. I decided to get right to it. I explained the problem. After taking a larger than usual dose, I couldn't sleep anymore. He didn't look that surprised. That only happens when you take stimulants, he said. Didn't he warn you? I haven't taken anything, I said. I don't do drugs. You sure? He asked. Nothing? Does alcohol count? I asked. Butyl nuts? Caffeine? What? No, that... He stopped for a second, thus his eyes turned away as he thought about it. He brought out his phone and checked something, then nodded. Butyl nuts, he repeated. That's high in arecoline. High in what? Arecoline. That's the first thing on the list. That's the worst one. Wait, what? He adjusted his glasses and read the list out loud. He was right. Arecoline was the first thing on the list. Right there next to hard narcotics. What does it mean? I asked. What's going to happen? He leaned back in his chair, sipped his coffee, and adjusted his glasses. We made this in our lab back in Vietnam. When the lab got shut down, it was scheduled to be burned, but we never got around to it. So you make drugs? Is that it? It's not a drug, he explained. It isolates a particular chemical element. It was originally made to nurture a type of deep-sea fish to gestate a kind of rough metal powder. What? Fish? I don't... Look, it's not a stimulant. It's not a drug. It puts a part of you in another place, and while it's there, your body becomes disconnected from a few of your basic needs. In most cases, sleep. So what does it mean? What's going to happen to me? He leaned forward, looking over the edge of his silver-rimmed glasses. Arecoline amplifies the effect by a magnitude of about 100. It's one of the reasons they had to shut down the development. At that magnitude, there's no telling what's going to happen. Wait, 100? So you're going to be awake for maybe a year, maybe 4, and then something I can't even imagine is going to happen to you. There was nothing else to say. He had no advice to give. There were no solutions. The damage was done. I almost burst into tears right then and there. My hands were shaking. I would be awake for years. And then something. Something he couldn't even imagine. If the effect 2 pills too many caught me a burn on the arm, what the hell was going to happen after 100? 200? The bandage itched, and I could hear the sizzling from a nearby kitchen. But it wasn't from the kitchen. It was that thing. And it was waiting for me. It was just a matter of time. I tried everything, but there was nothing to be done. There was nothing wrong with me on paper. I was healthier than ever, in fact. The lab in Vietnam that the man spoke of had been shut down, and all traces of it were dismantled. I had a vague lead to an investor in the US, but it didn't lead me anywhere. I had to sell my share in the company. It stung, but the payout was more than generous. It would keep me afloat for a couple of months, maybe a year, while I tried to work something out. But it was a desperate search for nothing. Even the man from the Research Institute would drop off the grid. And when strange men in suits started asking my friends and family about me, I knew I'd taken a step too far. This was in February 2023. Every day from that point forward has been a nightmare. In May that same year, I lost the need to eat. It's like my body entered a kind of metastasis. I could sit in a room for days on end, staring at a wall, and nothing would change. I would feel nothing. I would experience nothing. And I wouldn't care. And with no food, I'd need no bathroom breaks. Sometime in July, I lost the need to breathe. I would forget to do it for days on end, and my lungs would deflate to the point where it hurt to use them. After a couple of weeks, I couldn't talk without bleeding anymore. In late October that year, I stopped blinking. I would forget to do it for long periods of time, and dust would settle in my eyes. It didn't hurt, but it was uncomfortable to wash them, so I just ended up keeping them closed. Something happened to my skin. I think it stopped needing sunlight. Over a couple of days, I grew so pale you could almost see through me. My fingernails would fall off. Without using my mouth and jaw, my teeth fell out of my skull. I barely noticed. I had to move in with my sister to care for me. She couldn't understand what was happening, and neither could anyone else. She would force me to go to the doctors, and they couldn't make sense of it. Whenever they mentioned specialists, some anonymous group would throw enough money at them to look the other way. But all of that was just cake topping. It was all just physical things. It didn't compare to my thoughts and feelings. I would feel closer and closer to that dark place, that space beyond, where that thing waited for me. It hungered for me. All the needs and wants I'd lost, it had gained. It was hungry, tired, sunburnt, and in constant pain, and it wanted to give it all back to me, to consume me with it. If I just listened hard enough, I could hear it panting, like an eager dog waiting for its master to put food in his bowl, ready to tear into me, unashamed. Sometimes I forget what world I'm in. I'll get up and wander around, feeling the walls, imagining them as crumbling ruins. My sister once caught me wandering into the street. If my lungs had worked, she would have heard me begging that thing to leave me. Instead, I got hit by a car, and I didn't feel a thing, lying crumbled into a pile by the side of the road. The things people say feel like a distant dream. I have no need for serotonin, so joy is something of the past. Sometimes I can hear the music and cheering across the city, but it feels like they're mocking me. But the fear, that's still there. It may be the only emotion that remains. Now it's 2025. I think I attended Somyot's wedding, but I can't know for sure. I think I was there. I didn't see or hear. I can't feel anything when I move my arms anymore. There was a nice smell. I think he offered me some cake. I tried to smile at him, but I don't know if I did it. I've written this with great effort over several weeks. My sister has helped. She washes my eyes, and I would look at the letters for her to type. If I stretch a little, I can get enough air in my lungs to make a noise or a short word. Sometimes at night, when my sister is not here, I think I can hear something outside. Not just in my mind, but on the street. I think they are watching me. I think they're curious about what happens when I go to sleep. Or maybe they're scared. It's funny in a way. They called me Lurk, closing time. It's fitting. I can't help but think I should have stayed with my father maintaining farm equipment. I wish I could dream of seeing green, those pale green walls again. I had to finish this in a hurry. I think the effect is wearing off, like the man said it would. Yesterday I yawned. Today I'm tired. Good night, Bangkok.